The village of Kambiri was alive with music and celebration. Drums beat loudly, women sang, and children danced as the sun painted the sky in warm golden colors. But while everyone cheered and feasted, one girl sat still, quiet as the wind before a storm. Zelma, only 18, was the bride that day. Her skin glowed like sunrise, her eyes held dreams untold, but her heart was heavy with fear. Inside the small mud-brick bridal room, she stared at her henna-stained hands, wondering how her life had come to this. Zelma had always been a bright girl, full of hope. She wanted to teach, to inspire young girls like herself, to change the future of her village. But fate had other plans. Her father, Ohore, once a proud farmer, had fallen into deep debt. The only way out was to offer his daughter to Gaturi, a man twice her age, powerful and feared. Gaturi was rich, yes, but he was known for his cold eyes and quick temper. Everyone in Kambiri respected him, but nobody loved him. The marriage was arranged quickly. Zelma had no say. Her protests were met with silence. "It's for the family," they told her. "You'll live in a big house, wear fine clothes." But she didn't want a big house or shiny wrappers. She wanted freedom. She wanted love. That evening, the villagers gathered under the fading light. Zelma was dressed in red and gold, the colors of celebration, but her face showed no joy. As women sang her praises, she felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. Her feet were steady, but her soul trembled. When she arrived at Gaturi's compound, it was filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Gaturi stood tall, smiling wide, but Zelma saw something dangerous in his eyes, a prideful ownership, not affection. She bowed as tradition demanded, but inside, she screamed. The guests celebrated into the night, drinking palm wine and sharing stories. But behind the walls of Gaturi's home, a different story was about to unfold. Zelma sat on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap, waiting. Her heart pounded like a drum. She didn't know what to expect, but what came next would haunt her forever. That wedding night wasn't a beginning. It was the end of her innocence. It was the night her dreams were stolen, her voice silenced, and her hope nearly crushed. But what neither Gaturi nor anyone in the village knew was that deep inside Zelma, a fire had been lit, and one day, it would burn bright enough to shake the world that tried to break her. The moon shone high above Kambiri, like a quiet, silver eye, watching everything but doing nothing. Inside the room, where lanterns flickered weakly against the thick silence, Zelma sat stiffly on the edge of the mat. Her hands trembled, her chest tight with fear. Gaturi walked in slowly, his footsteps heavy like thunder rolling in. At first he smiled, but not the kind of smile that brings warmth. It was sharp, full of control, as if he was staring at something he owned, not someone he married. Zelma stood up slowly, unsure of what was expected of her. Before she could speak, Gaturi's smile faded. He grabbed her wrist hard, his fingers pressing into her skin like claws. "You're my wife now. Obey," he growled. She looked at him, eyes wide, body frozen. When she didn't kneel fast enough, his hand struck her face. She gasped, the sound soft and scared. Tears welled up, and without thinking, she whispered a quiet, shaking, "Please." That made it worse. He beat her again, once for crying, again for not being silent, a third time when she dared to say the word no. No one came to help. No voices rose in alarm. The room swallowed her pain. Outside, the drums from the wedding had long stopped, but the echoes still haunted her mind. Zelma fell to the floor, her body aching, her heart breaking. Blood stained her lip, and her arms were covered in bruises. Her wedding night was supposed to be the start of a new chapter, but it had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. She lay there in silence, staring up at the ceiling. The moonlight poured through the window, cold and distant. Even the stars seemed to blink away from her pain. But in the middle of that darkness, something flickered deep inside her. It wasn't hate, it was resolve. With blood on her lip and fire in her heart, Zelma whispered to herself, so low even the walls couldn't hear, "One day I will rise. One day you will kneel before me." She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but she knew she would never be the same. That night, Gaturi thought he had broken her, but instead, he had woken something powerful, something unshakable. Zelma wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a storm waiting to rise. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slipped into long, heavy months. Zelma moved like a shadow in Gaturi's house, silent, obedient, but hollow. Every morning, she woke up to fear. Every night, she went to sleep with pain. Gaturi's beatings had become part of her daily life. If she spoke too loud, he hit her. If she served his food too cold, he cursed her. If she looked at him wrong, he dragged her by the hair. Her body carried the bruises, but she hid them well. She wore long wrappers and forced smiles when villagers visited, but the truth hid behind her eyes. No one asked questions. No one dared. Gaturi was too powerful, too respected, too feared. The people of Kambiri gossiped in whispers, but never offered help. In a place where tradition was law and women were property, Zelma's suffering was invisible, but deep inside her, something refused to die. She remembered her vow from that first night, "One day I will rise." And though her lips never spoke it again, the words lived inside her like a secret flame. One evening, while gathering herbs near the forest edge, Zelma crossed paths with old Naya, the village's herbalist. Nia was a woman of secrets. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes were sharp, full of stories no one else remembered. Long ago, Nia had been a teacher, wise and respected, until bandits burned her school and left her with nothing but books, memories, and quiet strength. Perhaps Nia saw something in Zelma. Perhaps she knew pain when she saw it. Without a word, she slipped a small cloth bundle into Zelma's hand. Inside, hidden beneath dried leaves, were books. Books that spoke of law, of strength, of women who changed their fates. Zelma's heart raced. She hid them in the corner of her room, reading them at night when the house was dark and Gaturi snored like a beast. At first, the words were hard. Her eyes struggled, her mind slow, but she kept reading. Every page was a breath of life. Every sentence gave her power. She read about justice, about rights, about how even in silence, a woman could prepare for war. Her body still ached, her bruises still bloomed, but her mind, it grew stronger. Zelma didn't cry anymore, not because she didn't feel pain, but because she had learned to turn her pain into fuel. Every insult Gaturi threw, she stored it. Every slap, she remembered. And with each day, her silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. She walked through her suffering like a soldier walks through rain, wet, cold, but never stopping. Her soul was sharpening like a blade, and no one in Kambiri knew what was coming, because the girl they thought they had broken was quietly building her strength to break free. It was a dusty afternoon in Kambiri when Zelma went to the market to buy yams and dried pepper for Gaturi's dinner. Her eyes stayed low, her steps careful, always alert for anyone who might whisper or stare. But as she passed by a small stall selling carved wooden spoons, an old man sitting beneath a mango tree caught her eye. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were simple but neat, and he sat with a calmness that felt different. He watched her with interest, not the kind that judged or pitied, but the kind that noticed something deeper. "Child," he said, his voice soft but strong, "I see a courtroom in your gaze." Zelma froze. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She looked up slowly and replied with a bitter smile, "I see a cage." The old man nodded. "Then learn to unlock it." That was Makina, a retired judge from the city who had returned to Kambiri to live out his final years in peace. Most villagers didn't even know his past. They saw him as just another quiet elder. But inside his small hut at the edge of the village, he carried a lifetime of wisdom. That moment sparked something between them, a connection built on silence, on stories never told. A few days later, Makina sent a message through old Nia, asking Zelma to visit him after dark. And so, under the cover of night, while Gaturi snored in his drunken sleep, Zelma would sneak out of the house, wrapping herself in a dark shawl, and walk silently to Makina's hut. Inside, a single oil lamp burned, casting shadows on the worn walls. There were books stacked high, scrolls rolled tight, and the scent of old ink in the air. Makina began to teach her the law, not the law of fists and fear, but the real law, the law that protected the voiceless, the law that gave power to knowledge. She learned about women's rights, about courts, about justice. She memorized every article, every rule, every loophole that could be used against men like Gaturi. At first it was difficult. Her hands trembled when she wrote. Her voice shook when she read. But week after week, she grew. Her eyes became sharper, her words stronger. Makina didn't just teach her law, he taught her belief that even in a place like Kambiri, a girl like her could rise. And with every lesson, Zelma felt the cage around her mind break one bar at a time. She no longer just dreamed of freedom. She was learning how to fight for it, not with fists, not with anger, but with truth, with knowledge. with law. And that was more dangerous than any weapon she could ever hold. The night of the harvest moon arrived, bathing the village of Cambiri in silver light. The drums echoed in the distance as people celebrated the bounty of the season. But inside Gaturi's compound, there was no joy. That night, his rage had been worse than ever. Zelma's lip was split, her back throbbed from the blows, and her heart felt like it would break into pieces. But something inside her had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was fire. With trembling hands, she packed a small cloth bag, just a few pieces of dried cassava, her worn slippers, and the precious books Makina had given her. Blood still dried on her sleeve as she stepped out into the night, barefoot, breath sharp in her chest. She didn't care if the thorns cut her feet, or if wild animals roamed the path. She ran, not away, but toward something, toward freedom. Makina opened the door without a word when she arrived, bruised and shaking. He wrapped her in a blanket, gave her warm porridge, and said only, "You're ready." Within days, with Makina's help, they left Cambiri in a rickety old truck that coughed and groaned down the dusty road toward Tanduro, a distant city with tall buildings, endless noise, and people who didn't ask questions about your past. There, Makina introduced her to old friends, professors at a humble law school tucked behind a row of mango trees. They agreed to help her, inspired by her courage and Makina's plea. Life in Tanduro was not easy. By day, Zelma scrubbed floors and washed clothes for wealthy families who never looked her in the eye. She carried water, cooked meals, and sometimes went to bed hungry. But at night she studied like her life depended on it, because it did. Every page of law, every case she read, was a weapon in her hands, a tool to rewrite her story. She studied in silence, tears sometimes falling onto her notes, but she never gave up. Her bruises healed slowly, but her mind sharpened like a knife. Each night, when the city quieted, she would whisper the same words she had once said on her wedding night. "One day, I will rise. One day, you will kneel before me." And that day was getting closer. Pain had been her teacher. Now she was learning to become her own savior. Power was no longer just a word in a book. It was growing inside her with every passing day. Zelma was no longer just a village girl, a victim, or a runaway bride. She was becoming a storm. Years slipped by like pages in a book, but every day was a step forward for Zelma. At Tanduro Law Academy, she wasn't just another student. She was a storm in silence. She arrived with nothing but pain in her past, but with every class she attended, every textbook she devoured, she transformed. Her eyes that once carried fear now burned with purpose. Her hands, once bruised and trembling, now turned the pages of legal books like a warrior sharpening a blade. Professors whispered about her determination. She asked the toughest questions, challenged old ideas, and studied like the future of the world depended on it. And in many ways, it did. She earned a scholarship that covered her tuition, and then an internship with a prestigious law firm where her brilliance couldn't be ignored. People began to notice the girl with the quiet fire, the one who didn't speak much but whose eyes held stories that could shake mountains. Even though most didn't know her full past, she carried it with her like armor. She used her pain as power. While others debated cases from a distance, Zelma spoke like someone who had lived through the very things they studied. She stood for women who had been silenced, for girls forced into marriages, for anyone whose cries had been ignored. When she graduated top of her class, the National Justice Board took notice. It was unheard of for someone so young and from such a humble background to rise so fast. But Zelma was not just anyone. She passed the bar exams with ease, handled tough cases with grace, and soon earned the title of the voice of the voiceless. But her biggest honor came when she was appointed as the youngest judge in the entire city of Tanduro. The courtroom where she once imagined herself, hiding from Gaturi's beatings in her dreams, was now her kingdom. She sat in a black robe, eyes calm, voice strong, commanding the attention of every lawyer, every criminal, every citizen who entered. No longer the girl who had to ask for permission to speak, no longer the bride sold for a debt. She was the one who made the final call. She had the power to decide justice. People came from far villages just to catch a glimpse of her. They couldn't believe it. Zelma of Cambiri, now a judge. They called her the Iron Flower, soft in heart, but unbreakable in will. And though she had changed, one thing remained the same. The vow she made on that wedding night. She had risen, and the world would soon witness what happens when a broken girl learns to stand. The journey was not over, but Zelma had already won the war that mattered most. In the dusty streets of Kambiri, whispers turned into loud voices. Gaturi, once feared and respected, was now a shadow of his former self. His once flourishing business had fallen apart. The men who used to bow before him no longer came around. His compound, which had once echoed with pride and power, now stood in silence. Walls cracked, roof leaking, goats wandering in and out like it was no longer anyone's home. It started with a scandal. A woman named Sewa, once his housemaid, came forward with a trembling voice, accusing him of years of abuse. Then another, then another. The village elders tried to silence the women, but the noise had already reached Tanduro. A team of investigators arrived. They uncovered evidence of illegal dealings, violence, and years of silenced cries. Gaturi's name was now poison. Villagers who once feared him now crossed the road when he passed. Children threw stones at his gate. His new wife, whom he married after Zelma ran away, packed her things one night and vanished without a word. Even his own brothers refused to speak his name. He started drinking heavily, trying to drown the ghosts he had created. Then came the night that marked the end. The moon was high, and the village slept when police sirens cut through the quiet. Officers in dark uniforms arrived at Gaturi's compound. He stumbled out, barefoot and drunk, screaming at the top of his lungs. "You fools!" he shouted, waving a broken bottle. "I made this village. You think you can arrest me?" But the officers didn't flinch. They had a warrant, and his crimes could no longer be hidden. They grabbed him, twisted his arms behind his back, and as they pushed him toward the police truck, he saw the villagers standing at a distance, watching. No one helped him. No one pitied him. As they shoved him into the truck, he laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. "You think you can judge me?" he roared into the night. "I am untouchable." But even the stars above seemed to look away from him now. What Gaturi didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was who would be sitting behind the judge's bench when his case was heard. He didn't know that the girl he had beaten, silenced and thrown away like dirt would soon face him again, not as a victim, but as justice itself. His fall had begun, and destiny was not yet done with him. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the soft clicking of cameras and the murmurs of journalists scribbling notes. The walls of Tanduro High Court, tall and polished, seemed to hold their breath for what was about to unfold. Gaturi was escorted inside, his hands chained, his once proud chest now hunched in shame. He looked thinner, older, defeated. Still, a flicker of arrogance remained in his eyes until he looked up. His breath caught. Time seemed to pause. There, high above the courtroom floor, sat Judge Zelma in her black robe, dignified and calm. Her eyes, once full of pain, now held the strength of storms. Gaturi blinked, as if trying to clear a ghost from his sight. "Zelma," he croaked, voice barely a whisper. Zelma did not blink. She didn't show emotion. Her voice rang through the courtroom, clear and powerful. "Mr. Gaturi, this court does not recognize you as a husband or as a former village elder. You are here today as an accused criminal, and in this courtroom, we bow only to the law." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward. The gallery gasped. No one had expected this. No one imagined the once powerless girl from Kambiri would be the one to judge the man who once owned her fate. Gaturi's knees wobbled. He gripped the edge of the table for balance. All his pride, his past power, his loud voice, gone. Before him stood the woman he had tried to break, but she had risen, taller than any wall he had ever built. The charges were read out: assault, domestic violence, financial fraud, and more. Witnesses came forward, each testimony adding weight to the chains already wrapped around his soul. But it was Zelma's presence that crushed him most. She was calm, but not cold, strong, but not bitter. Her questions were sharp, her judgments fair. She did not seek revenge. She delivered justice. At one point, Gaturi looked at her again, his lips trembling. "I never thought you'd—" Zelma raised a hand gently. "This is not about what you thought. This is about what you did." The courtroom fell silent again. Every word she spoke echoed not just in the room, but in the hearts of those watching across the country. For the first time in his life, Gaturi felt true fear, not from fists or weapons, but from the truth standing before him in the form of a woman he once underestimated. She didn't scream, she didn't curse, she simply let justice speak. And in that moment, the world saw what true power looked like. The trial stretched over 2 long weeks. Each day brought new voices, brave women who once lived in silence, now standing tall to share their pain. One by one, they took the witness stand and told the court what Gaturi had done to them, how he hurt, manipulated, and destroyed their spirits. Their stories were raw, heartbreaking, but necessary. They revealed the truth about a man who had hidden behind wealth and power for too long. Zelma listened to every word with quiet strength. She never raised her voice. She didn't allow emotion to cloud her role. Even when her own affidavit was read aloud, detailing the bruises, the scars, the nights she cried alone on a cold floor, her face remained composed. Her pain had become purpose. The courtroom grew heavy with emotion. Some cried, some clenched their fists. But Zelma stood firm. She knew this was bigger than her. This was for every girl who had been told to keep quiet, every woman who had been blamed, every victim who had been denied justice. On the final day, the entire room waited as she stood for her closing statement. Her voice was soft, but it carried across every ear in the room. Some say forgiveness is weakness, she began. But justice is strength. I do not stand here to punish out of revenge. I stand here because I must, because silence gave him power, because truth gives us healing. Today I sentence not out of anger, but out of duty. The silence that followed was thick, like a breath the entire courtroom was holding. Then the words came. Gaturi of Kambiri, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison. A gasp filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Gaturi's face crumbled, his pride shattered like glass. He didn't scream, he didn't argue, he wept. Tears poured from his eyes as he was led away in chains. The same chains he once used to control others, now wrapped around his own future. Zelma sat back in her seat, not triumphant, but peaceful. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for all those who had suffered in silence. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate. But inside, something finally felt free. Outside the courtroom, people gathered. Women, men, elders, and youth. Some cheered, others simply stood in silence, moved by the courage they had just witnessed. Zelma's name began to spread across the country, not as a victim, but as a warrior of truth. She had not just won a case, she had changed a story. When Zelma finally returned to Kambiri, after years of fighting for justice, the village erupted in celebration. The air was thick with excitement, and the sound of singing as women came out from their homes, their voices rising like a song of freedom. Girls in the village, who once had no hope of a future beyond their families' expectations, now wore robes adorned with Zelma's name, robes that symbolized not just a victory, but a change in their world. Even the elders, who had long turned a blind eye to the suffering of women, now bowed their heads in respect to the woman who had rewritten their history. Zelma walked through the village, her eyes wide with emotion, but her heart filled with purpose. She was no longer the quiet, broken girl who had once been forced into silence. She had become a force, a living, breathing symbol of resilience. She had not just taken down a man, she had dismantled a system that had oppressed her, and so many others, for generations. Her return to Kambiri wasn't just about personal triumph. She opened a legal aid center in the village, a place where women and children could go for help without fear. It became a sanctuary for those who had nowhere to turn. Zelma, with her sharp mind and compassionate heart, made sure that no one in Kambiri would ever have to suffer in silence again. But she didn't stop there. Knowing the importance of education, Zelma also funded a school for girls in Kambiri, a school that would teach them to read, to speak, to dream, and to fight for their rights. She wanted these girls to grow up knowing they had power, knowing they had choices. She wanted them to know that nothing, not even the cruelest man or the harshest tradition, could hold them back. She became more than just a judge. She became an inspiration, a symbol of what can happen when you rise above the darkness and refuse to let it define you. Zelma's life proved that no pain lasts forever. Her journey showed everyone in Kambiri and beyond that even in the most oppressive conditions, strength and hope can grow. Silence may seem loud at times, but in the end, it is the storms of truth and courage that shatter it. As for Gaturi, his fate had already been sealed. He spent his final days in a dusty prison cell, forgotten by those he had once controlled. The man who thought he was untouchable was now a shadow, buried in the ruins of his own actions. No one in Kambiri remembered him with respect. He was just a cautionary tale. Zelma's story became the anthem of the village. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the night may seem, the dawn is always coming. Justice may be slow, but it never forgets, and the light that follows is worth every step of the journey. If you've been inspired by Zelma's incredible journey of strength, resilience, and justice, remember, your voice matters. No matter how difficult life gets, no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always hope. Zelma's story reminds us that silence can be broken and courage can rise from the deepest pain. We all have the power to stand up against injustice, to fight for what's right, and to create a better world for those who come after us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's spread the message of hope and empowerment so that together we can make the world a better place for everyone. Like this video if you believe in the power of resilience, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales of strength, courage, and transformation. Thank you for watching and supporting this journey. Your support means the world to us, and we are grateful to have you with us on this incredible path. Keep fighting, keep dreaming, and remember that your story is just beginning. Together, we can create change. Thank you once again, and we'll see you in the next story.